The conference room smelled like old leather and lemon polish, sunlight cutting through plantation shutters in sharp, golden lines. I sat across from my sister Madison, watching her manicured fingers drum against the mahogany table, our mother's hand resting on her shoulder like a crown. The attorney's folder sat between us, thick with documents that represented our grandmother's entire life reduced to paper and ink. Madison wore cream, Tory Burch, pearls at her throat, the kind of outfit that whispered old money even though she'd never earned a dollar of it herself. Our mother, Patricia, had that look on her face, the one she wore at garden parties when she knew she was about to win something. They thought they knew how this would go. They'd been preparing for this moment since Grandma Vera's funeral 8 weeks ago, planning how to divide an empire neither of them had built. Mr. Harrison adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat. We're here for the final reading of Vera Catherine Beaumont's last will and testament. His voice was measured, professional, the voice of a man who'd delivered both fortunes and heartbreaks with equal steadiness. Madison leaned forward slightly, expectant. Our mother's grip on her shoulder tightened, protective and possessive all at once. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, watching. The original will, executed in October 2019, Harrison continued, outlined a division of assets between granddaughters Claire and Madison Beaumont, to be managed jointly under the supervision of HEPAWS, and something in that pause made the air change. However, there is an updated codicil, dated March 14, 2024, which supersedes all previous versions. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavy, like the moment before thunder. My mother's smile flickered. Madison blinked, confused. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope, sliding it across the polished surface. Mr. Harrison's eyes met mine, and I saw the smallest flicker of respect cross his face. Mrs. Beaumont has a certified copy, he said quietly. My mother's hand slipped from Madison's shoulder. What copy? What are you talking about? I didn't answer. I just watched as Harrison opened the document, the pages crisp and official, bearing my grandmother's signature in her careful, elegant script. And then, he read the words that would change everything. The updated will bequeaths the entirety of the Beaumont estate, valued at $14.3 million, to Claire Marie Beaumont, with the sole exception of one beachfront condominium, valued at $340,000, bequeathed to Madison. The silence that followed was absolute. My sister's face drained of color. My mother stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. That's impossible, she whispered, but it wasn't. And somewhere, I knew Grandma Vera was smiling. If you've ever been the invisible one in your own family, the one they expected to survive on scraps while someone else feasted, stay with me. Because what happened in that Charleston conference room didn't come from luck. It came from a grandmother who spent 34 years watching, waiting, and finally choosing the granddaughter who'd earned what the other had only expected. Growing up, our house looked like something from a magazine. White columns, wraparound porch, camellia bushes blooming pink and red, every spring like clockwork. My father Richard was a cardiologist, respected and distant, the kind of man who believed his job was to provide money and let someone else handle the mess of feelings. My mother Patricia was the queen of appearances, hosting garden parties where women in linen sipped sweet tea and smiled with their mouths while their eyes stayed cold and calculating. And Madison and I, we were supposed to be the perfect daughters, matching, and lovely, and grateful. But perfection was only required of one of us. Madison was born 4 minutes before me, and somehow those 4 minutes became a lifetime of distance. She was the one who cried prettily, who made people want to fix things for her, who learned early that charm could open doors effort never would. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one our mother introduced at parties with. This is Claire. She's very self-sufficient. I used to think that was a compliment. By the time I turned 16, I understood it was a life sentence. When Madison wanted to be a debutante, our parents paid the $5,000 fee without hesitation, bought her a white gown that cost more than our monthly grocery bill, threw her a party where she curtsied in front of 200 people who applauded like she'd accomplished something. When I asked if I could attend an art program that summer, something that costs $800 and might actually teach me a skill, my mother sighed. Claire, Honey, we just spent so much on your sister's season. Maybe next year. Next year never came. Madison got a white Lexus for her 16th birthday, delivered to the house with a red bow on the hood. I got her old Honda Civic, the one with the broken air conditioning and a dent in the passenger door she'd gotten backing into a mailbox and never explained. You don't mind, do you? My mother asked, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. You're so practical! I said I didn't mind. I learned early that minding didn't change anything, but every Sunday, we drove to Grandma Vera's estate on the edge of town. A sprawling property with live oaks, dripping Spanish moss and a house that smelled like old books and lemon verbena. Vera Beaumont had built her fortune slowly and carefully, starting with a single antique shop in the 1960s and expanding into real estate, rental properties, art collecting. She was sharp and elegant, the kind of woman who never raised her voice because she never needed to. During those Sunday dinners, Madison would charm and perform, telling stories about cheerleading and boys, and our mother would beam with pride. I'd sit quietly, eating pot roast and watching the light filter through the curtains. But I noticed something. Vera's eyes would find me across the table, steady and knowing. After dinner, she'd ask me to help her water the garden or look at a painting she'd acquired, and we'd talk about books, about history, about the difference between being liked and being respected. Claire, she told me once, her thin hand cool against mine, never let anyone convince you that being quiet means being weak. I was 19 then, working my way through college, and I didn't fully understand. Batty felt it the way you feel a storm building before the first drop of rain. College split my life with Madison's into two completely different stories. She went to the University of South Carolina, joined a sorority, lived in a house with her Greek letters on the door. Our parents paid for everything: tuition, housing, meal plan, spending money, the dresses she needed for date parties, and formals. I went to the College of Charleston on a partial scholarship and worked 2 jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. I shelved books at the campus library for $9 an hour and tutored economics students in the evenings, my hands always smelling like coffee and old paper. When I asked my parents if they could help with even part of my student loans, my father looked uncomfortable and my mother said, "Sweetheart, we're already stretched thin with Madison's expenses. You understand, don't you?" She said it like it was reasonable, like it made perfect sense that one daughter deserved help and the other deserved to struggle. "You've always been so independent," she added, as if independence was something I'd chosen instead of something forced on me. I graduated with honors and $32,000 in debt. Madison graduated with a degree in communications, 0 debt, and an engagement ring from a boy whose family owned 3 car dealerships across the state. Her wedding was in May 2014, held at a plantation-style venue with moss-draped oaks and 200 guests. The ceremony cost $83,000. I know because I overheard my mother on the phone with the wedding planner, laughing about how they'd gone over budget, but it was worth it for their first daughter's special day. I was a bridesmaid in a lavender dress I had to buy myself. At the reception, my mother gave a tearful speech about watching Madison grow up, about how this was the day she'd dreamed of since Madison was born, about love and family and dreams coming true. She never mentioned me. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, watching Madison spin under string lights in her $5,000 gown, and I felt a hand on my arm. Grandma Vera stood beside me, elegant, in navy silk, her eyes sad. "You deserved better than this," she said quietly. I shook my head. "It's fine, Grandma. I'm used to it." Her fingers tightened on my wrist. "That," she said, "is exactly the problem, Claire. You shouldn't have to be used to it." 4 years later, I married Daniel in a small ceremony at a bed and breakfast in Asheville. We paid for everything ourselves: the flowers, the photographer, the dinner for 18 people in a private room with mountain views. When I called to tell my parents the date, my mother sighed, "Oh, how lovely, dear," in the same tone she used when someone told her about a new recipe. They came to the wedding, sat in the front row, smiled for pictures. But there was no speech, no toast, no envelope with a check and blessings whispered in my ear. Afterward, my mother kissed my cheek and said, "It was very nice, Claire, very simple." Simple. Code for small, for less than four, not worth the $83,000 they'd spent on Madison's event. But Grandma Vera was there, dressed in silver, and when she hugged me, she pressed something into my hand. In the bathroom later, I opened the envelope and found a check for $10,000 and a note in her slanted handwriting. For the granddaughter who knows how to build without applause. I sat on the clothes toilet and cried harder than I had in years, Daniel's concerned voice outside the door asking if I was okay. That check paid off a quarter of my student loans. More importantly, it told me someone saw me when everyone else looked away. When Vera was diagnosed with congestive heart failure at 18, the doctor said she had maybe 2 years if she was careful. I rearranged my work schedule to visit her 3 afternoons a week. I'd sit in her sun-filled bedroom that smelled like lavender and old wood, reading to her from books she loved, bringing crossword puzzles, listening to stories about opening her first shop when women couldn't get business loans without a man's signature. Madison visited twice in the first 6 months. Both times she came with our mother. Both times she spent most of the visit scrolling through her phone. I'm just so busy with the kids, Sasai Donse breezing in with Starbucks and leaving 15 minutes later. Vera watched her go, then turned to me with those sharp blue eyes. Busy is a choice, she said. Priorities are truth. In early March of 2024, Vera called me on a Tuesday morning. I need you to bring Mr. Harrison here, she said, her voice clear, despite the oxygen tube in her nose. There are things I need to finalize. I thought she meant healthcare directives, maybe power of attorney updates. When I arrived with the attorney that Thursday, Vera was sitting up in bed, her hair brushed, wearing her good pearls. I want Claire to stay, she told Harrison. I want her to witness this. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. For the next hour, Vera went through her entire estate, property by property, account by account, making changes in a voice that never wavered. When she signed the final page, her hand trembled slightly but her signature was perfect. She looked at me. Don't tell them yet, she said softly. Let them show you who they are, one more time. I want you to see it clearly. I didn't understand then. 6 weeks later, she passed away on a quiet April morning. The window opened to dogwood blossoms and birdsong. I was holding her hand when her breathing simply stopped, gentle and final. Madison arrived an hour later and collapsed into our mother's arms, sobbing so loudly the nurses closed the door. The funeral was enormous. Hundreds of people who'd known Vera through business or church or the historical society. Madison wore black Prada and cried into monogrammed tissue. I stood silent in a simple navy dress, feeling hollow and raw in a way that had nothing to do with performance. 2 weeks later, the letter came. Formal, printed on Harrison and Associates letterhead. A state review scheduled 60 days from date of death per decedent's instructions. All named heirs required to attend. I filed it in my desk drawer and tried to go back to normal. Back to my job as a financial analyst. Back to dinners with Daniel, back to a life that felt strange without Sunday visits to Vera's house. But my mother couldn't let it rest. She started calling, her voice honeyed and strange. We should talk about the estate, Claire. As a family, I'm sure your grandmother wanted us to make decisions together. Madison sent a text 2 weeks before the reading. I've been thinking about the beach house. Would you be okay if I took that? You're not really a beach person anyway. I didn't respond. I just watched them, the way Vera had taught me to watch, seeing the truth beneath the words. My mother asked me to help sort through Vera's belongings. I agreed, curious to see what she'd do. She moved through the house like she owned it, pointing at furniture and paintings and jewelry. Madison would love this for her dining room. This should definitely go to your sister. She appreciates nice things. My name never came up. I was invisible again, just like always. But one afternoon, alone in Vera's study, while my mother took a phone call in the garden, I found something, a wooden box in the bottom drawer of her desk, tied with ribbon. Inside were letters. Dozens of team, each one addressed to me in Vera's handwriting. Letters she'd written over the years but never sent, documenting every time my parents had chosen Madison over me, every time they'd called my strength an excuse to give me less. You remind me of myself. One letter read, dated from my college years. Built from nothing, because no one handed us the blueprint. That's why I'm making sure you're protected. They'll be angry when they find out. But anger fades. Security doesn't. My hands shook as I read them. She'd seen everything. She'd always seen. The next day, I called Harrison's office. His secretary was kind and professional. Ms. Beaumont, as a named party in the will, you're entitled to review a certified copy of the codicil before the official reading, if you'd like. I met him that afternoon, in his quiet office, with its view of the harbor. He slid the envelope across his desk, his expression carefully neutral. Your grandmother was extraordinarily thorough, he said. In 30 years of estate law, I've rarely seen documentation this airtight. I took it home, closed the blinds, and read every word. The main house on Trad Street, appraised at $4.2 million. The beach house on Isle of Palms, $2.8 million. Investment accounts totaling $6 million. Art and antique collections, valued at just over $1 million. The full estate, $14.3 million. All of it left to me, Claire Marie Beaumont, except for one small beachfront condo worth $340,000, bequeathed to Madison. The attached letter from Vera laid it out in clear, unflinching language. She detailed every inequality, every dismissal, every time I'd been told I didn't need help, while Madison got everything handed to her on silver. Madison receives the smallest property, Vera wrote, not as punishment, but as education. Perhaps owning something she didn't ask for will teach her what earning means. I sat in my dark apartment until the sun set, holding those papers, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. Not triumph, just the quiet, solid weight of being seen. The morning of the estate reading, I woke before dawn. I dressed carefully in navy, simple and professional, and drove through empty Charleston streets to Harrison's office. I arrived first, and sat in the leather chair facing the window, watching the city wake up. My mother and Madison arrived together 20 minutes later, laughing about something, my mother in pink Chanel. Madison dripping in jewelry I recognized from Vera's collection that she'd probably already claimed in her mind. They saw me and their smiles dimmed slightly, but they recovered fast. Claire, honey, my mother said, not quite meeting my eyes. You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep? We sat. Harrison entered with the folder, and the performance began. He read the formalities, and I watched my mother lean forward, eager, watched Madison's fingers tap that entitled rhythm against the wood. Then came the pause, the shift. The moment Harrison said, however, there is an updated codicil dated March 14th, 2024. Slid the envelope across the table. My mother's face went tight. What is that? The updated will? I said quietly. Grandma made sure I had a copy. And then Harrison read the truth into existence, and I watched their world crumble in real time. My mother stood, her voice shaking. This can't be legal. She wasn't in her right mind. She was manipulated. Mrs. Beaumont was evaluated by 2 independent physicians, Harrison said calmly. Both certified her as fully competent. The will was witnessed, notarized, filed according to state law. It's completely binding. Madison's hands were trembling. Her perfect composure shattered. This isn't fair. I'm her granddaughter. She loved me. She did love you, I said, meeting her eyes. But love and reward aren't the same thing. Harrison continued reading, and Vera's letter filled the room with uncomfortable truths. She'd documented everything, my 2 jobs, through college, my self-funded wedding, the Sunday visits I'd made every single week for 5 years while Madison couldn't be bothered. Claire showed up, Vera had written, not when it was convenient, but when it mattered. That is the difference between performance and presence. The room was silent except for the rustle of papers. My mother tried once more. She must have been confused, turned against us. I visited her every week, I said quietly. You only came when you wanted something. Madison stood, grabbing her purse. I can't believe you did this. I looked at her, really looked at her. I didn't do anything. Grandma did. Maybe you should ask yourself why. They left together, heels clicking on marble, Madison's sobs echoing down the hallway. The door closed and I sat alone with Harrison and the paperwork that proved sometimes being forgotten is the first step to being chosen. My mother tried to fight it. She hired an attorney who called Harrison 3 days later, threatening to contest on grounds of undue influence. It went nowhere. The medical evaluations were ironclad, the witnesses impeccable, Vera's intent crystal clear. After 2 weeks and $5,000 in legal fees, they dropped it. My phone exploded with messages. Family members I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly having opinions about fairness and blood and loyalty. I muted the group chat and let them shout into the void. A few reached out privately with kindness. My cousin Sarah wrote, "Vera always saw something special in you. I'm glad she made sure you knew it." My Uncle Tom sent, "This is tearing the family apart. Was it worth it?" I didn't answer, but the answer was yes. Madison posted something vague on Facebook about betrayal and people showing their true colors. I didn't engage. A week later, my mother appeared at my office, immaculate and furious. We sat in a conference room and she said, "Your sister is devastated. Do you even care?" "I care," I said, "but caring doesn't mean letting myself be erased." "We gave you everything. You gave me nothing," I interrupted. "You gave Madison everything and called me strong enough to survive without it." "Well, I survived. Grandma just made sure I didn't have to keep surviving alone." My mother stared at me like I was speaking a language she'd never learned. She left without another word. I never saw her again. I hired professionals to help manage the estate, kept the Trad Street house, and moved into it with Daniel, sold the beach house when Madison couldn't afford to buy it, and used part of the money to establish a scholarship fund at the College of Charleston, the Vera Beaumont Scholarship for Self-Sufficient Students, for kids working 2 jobs to pay tuition, for the ones whose families called them strong instead of helping them. The first recipient was a girl named Maya who worked overnight shifts at a hospital and still made Dean's List. When I handed her the check, she cried and said, "You have no idea what this means." I smiled. "Actually, I do." 6 months later, I sat on Vera's porch, my porch now, watching the sunset paint the garden gold and rose. Church bells rang in the distance. Sweet tea sweated on the table beside me. The house felt like mine finally. Not just legally, but in my bones. I thought about my mother in Madison sometimes, but without anger. Just a quiet understanding that some people will only love you as long as you stay small. I'd stopped being small. The scholarship fund sent me a letter from Maya. She'd quit one of her jobs. Her grades had improved. She felt like she could finally breathe. "Thank you for seeing me," she wrote. I pinned it to the refrigerator next to Vera's photos. That was the inheritance that mattered most. Not the money, they say. Vera had seen me when everyone else looked away, and now I was learning to see others the same way. My mother in Madison never apologized. I heard through family that Madison moved to Atlanta, that my mother joined a new church somewhere without the whispers. I didn't wish them harm. I just didn't wish them anything at all. One evening, I sat in Vera's chair watching the light fade, and I understood finally what she'd been trying to teach me all along. Being strong doesn't mean accepting less. It means knowing your worth and protecting it, even when the people who should love you try to convince you you're not worth protecting. Inheritance isn't just property and money. It's the lessons you carry forward, the boundaries you build, the life you create when you stop waiting for permission to matter. I'd inherited all of that from a woman who saw me clearly when I was invisible to everyone else. The sun dipped below the trees. Somewhere, a dog barked. The evening settled soft and warm around me. I took a sip of tea and smiled. Not from triumph, but from peace. I was home, not because of the house, but because I'd finally stopped living in someone else's shadow. If you've ever been the overlooked one, the one your family expected to stay small and quiet, the one who turned out to be exactly who they underestimated, share your story below. And if you stayed until the end, you know why patience and boundaries sometimes hold more power than anger ever could? Subscribe for more stories that prove being forgotten by the wrong people is sometimes the first step to being chosen by the right ones.